The French and German leaders prepare to thrash out Europe's biggest headaches behind closed doors at an informal dinner. Gaza residents attacked the UN mission building after it suspended the reconstruction of homes destroyed during Israel's last operation. And American police, who used black suspects' mugshots for target practice, see angry web users donate their own photos instead. Hello, you're watching RT International, coming to you live from Moscow, where it's midday. Islamization, EU sanctions against Russia and the rise of Eurosceptic political forces. That's set to somewhat spoil the appetite of the German and French leaders at their dinner on Friday. Angela Merkel and François Hollande are expected to discuss Europe's next chapter behind closed doors during an informal get-together in Strasbourg. Here's RT's Murat Gazdiev.
The talks, by their very nature, are going to be incredibly abstract. They're going to be talking about the European Union and the Eurozone years and years ahead into the future. As for who is going to be doing the talking, well, they're two very different partners, almost in different weight categories. You have France with its sluggish economic growth, its internal resistance to change, and then you have Germany, a powerhouse of Europe, with its incredibly dynamic economy, and the two can't even agree on what to do about the euro crisis, with Germany demanding merciless austerity and France electing to borrow their way out of a debt crisis. But some of the problems the two will face in the future are very similar, if not the same. For example, you have the problems of immigration and Islam. With more migrants coming to Europe and settling here, it's become apparent that they aren't integrating fast enough. And then the problem of Islam. Hundreds and hundreds of European citizens are fighting in Iraq, in Syria, in the ranks of the Islamic State as we speak. And those could then come back to Europe, bringing back with them not only terror, but spreading their ideology, their radical ideology here in Europe. And then you have the disaster in the east, the civil war in Ukraine, Europe falling out with Russia, which is, after all, its chief energy supplier and one of its largest markets for cars, for services, for goods. It's hard to imagine a prosperous Europe without at least some partnership with Russia. And then there's the problem of what's happening in Greece right now, which is that the Greeks are rebelling. They're challenging the established, if unofficial, hierarchy within the European Union. So they're going to have to decide on how to deal with the rebellious states, future ones, in Europe. So a lot on the plates of French and German leaders as they sit down to chat over Europe's future.
So when it comes to Greece's debt, there are no small numbers. It's worth hundreds of billions of dollars, which works out to just under 100,000 euros per worker in Greece. Not that wages can keep up. The most recent statistics say they've dropped year on year to around 1,200 euros a month. Well, the new Greek government is seeking to be let off from some of its bailout debt, something the rest of the EU is not eager to approve. A spokesman for Angela Merkel said Greece can't erase its obligations with an election. The Finnish Prime Minister simply refuses to forgive the loan, while one EU Central Bank Board member called on Athens to play by the rules. Well, the individual interests of EU members have already swelled anti-Brussels sentiment among even the main players. In Italy, the idea of breaking away from the bloc is gathering momentum. Some media have labelled the man behind the movement there as the most dangerous in Europe. Leaving the EU is also now up for discussion in Hungary, where the Speaker of Parliament has been contemplating an exit. Paul Murphy, an Irish anti-austerity MP, says the bloc's leaders have brought this upon themselves.
Billions of euros have been so-called, sent in a so-called bailout to Greece, to Ireland, to Portugal, but a tiny, tiny percentage of those euros have gone to assist ordinary people. They've generally gone onto the country's balance sheets and then back out of the country. So that there has been no bailout of the Greek people or the Irish people or the Portuguese or the Spanish people. What there has been is a Europe-wide and worldwide bailout of the banks at the expense of working people, at the expense of the 99% across Europe. So I think all of us across Europe should stand with the Syriza government and should stand with working class people in Greece in demanding a debt write-down, not just for Greece, but for all those countries where you have unsustainable debts.
The new Greek parliament may be less than a week old, but it's already taken on the EU over its anti-Russia sanctions. The bloc's foreign ministers this week held back from widening the sanctions, choosing instead to extend the current ones, something the Greeks claim is a diplomatic victory. Well, let's bring in Professor Bruno Dvorsky from the National Institute of Eastern Civilizations, who joins us now live here on RT International. Thank you very much for your time. Greece isn't exactly in Europe's power club, is it? How much influence do you think they really had on the decision not to tighten sanctions?
No, Greece has not a strong influence in Europe, but the Greek situation, the economical situation of Greece is so difficult for Europe that Europe has to negotiate with Greece some agreements, and on that field, it's obvious that Greece has some possibility to negotiate and to have an influence over the European diplomacy. The problem is that there is an economical problem on one side and the diplomatic problem of European Union with Russia. And these two problems are two different levels. But of course, from the point of view of Athens, it's very logical to use both of them in the negotiations.
Well, do you think that now that Greece has spoken out against the sanctions, do you think other member states will follow their lead?
I think that already we have some states like Slovakia, like Hungary, like Austria, like Czech Republic, even to a certain extent, that are more and more doubting about the sanction politics against Russia. And in the same time, in Germany, there are strong tensions about what has to be the strategy concerning Russia. So, Europe needs now radical change, but the question is if European leaders, and especially German and French leaders, are ready to this radical change. For the moment, it looks that they can't, but that they are not, but to a certain extent they will be obliged to for economical reasons, not only for political reasons, but for economical reasons, because Europe needs Russia to have some stabilization.
So is it your interpretation that sanctions might get tightened in the near future or not? I mean, the EU leaders, you mentioned Hollande and Merkel, they have their summit next month, of course.
I don't know for short term. Maybe they will not be tightened for short term. For the long term, it's the only solution if they don't want a tension strategy and a war strategy, because of course it's always a possibility. But if we have to speak rationally with rational with rational politicians, it looks obvious that earlier or later Europe will have to tighten sanctions.
So are the sanctions working then? Have they helped to resolve or de-escalate the Ukrainian crisis in any way?
I don't know if Europe is ready now to stop the escalation in Ukraine, but it's the only solution for long term. So it looks for me that it will have to be done earlier or later, because Ukrainian situation is catastrophic, Greek situation is catastrophic, Middle East situation is for Europe catastrophic. So Europe has to change its policy. Of course, it's linked with the pressure Europe is having from United States. But I think even United States are in not a very good situation, so they will have to negotiate if we are not going toward a world war. But it's of course the situation which will be the worst one. If we think in Europe we have some rational politicians, they will have to negotiate with Russia about Ukraine, about Greece, about Middle East.
Okay, Professor Bruno Dvorsky, thank you very much for that from the National Institute of Eastern Civilizations.
Well, thank you very much.